Alice. Alice, are you there?
I'm here, baby. I'm right here. What do you need?
I had the dream again. The one where Mommy comes to get me.
Tell me about it, sweetheart.
She was standing in this bright light. And she looked so pretty, just like in the pictures Daddy keeps. She said she's been waiting for me, and that it won't hurt anymore when I come to her.
Timothy.
But Alice. I told her I wasn't ready. I told her I wanted to stay here with you and Daddy. Do you think she's angry with me?
Oh, honey, no. Your mommy could never be angry with you for wanting to live. Never.
Alice. Can I ask you something? Something I've never asked anyone.
Anything, baby. Anything at all.
Will you be my mommy now? I know you're not really my mommy, but you take care of me like she did. And you love me like she did. And when I'm scared at night, you hold me like she used to.
Timothy. Oh, my sweet Timothy. You'd live and I'd be your mommy, okay?
Can I live? Can I please just?
What you just witnessed was a conversation that would change 3 lives forever. But this isn't just a story about a dying child's wish, or a maid's impossible love, or even a billionaire's journey from despair to redemption. This is a story about the moment when ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things, and the price they're willing to pay for miracles. 6 months ago, Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy. Today, he's about to discover that the most precious things in life can't be purchased at any price. Welcome back, my wonderful and lovely family. If you're new here, please let me know where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of the story. Hitting the notification button would ensure you're the first to see the next story. I pray this story brings you and yours glad tidings. Marcus Wellington's name was synonymous with power. At 42, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion, with headquarters spanning 3 continents. His signature appeared on contracts that moved mountains, literally and figuratively. Steel skyscrapers bore his name across New York's skyline. Politicians sought his endorsement. World leaders took his calls. But on this particular Tuesday morning in September, as autumn painted Central Park in shades of amber and gold, Marcus Wellington sat in his penthouse office staring at a piece of paper that rendered all his wealth utterly meaningless. The medical report trembled in his hands. The words seemed to blur and sharpen, as if his eyes refused to accept what they were reading. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive progression, 3 months, possibly less. 3 months. 90 days. 2,160 hours. That's all the time his 8-year-old son Timothy had left on this earth. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He had built his fortune by solving impossible problems. When others said it couldn't be done, Marcus Wellington found a way. When banks said no, he created his own financing. When governments said impossible, he rewrote the laws. But now, facing his son's death sentence, all his money, all his connections, all his legendary problem-solving abilities amounted to nothing more than expensive tissue paper. 6 months ago, his world had already been shattered when his wife, Elena, lost her battle with breast cancer. Elena Wellington, former supermodel, philanthropist, the woman who had taught him that there was more to life than quarterly reports and stock options. She had filled their Fifth Avenue mansion with laughter, turned their cold marble halls into a home, and given him the greatest gift of his life, Timothy. Now, as Marcus stared out at the city he had helped build, he could still hear Elena's final words echoing in his mind. Promise me you'll take care of our boy. Promise me you'll show him how to live, not just how to survive. How could he keep that promise when Timothy was dying? 3 floors below, in the mansion's heart, a very different kind of strength was quietly changing everything. Alice Washington moved through the kitchen with the grace of someone who had learned that love was best expressed through small, consistent actions. At 28, she possessed a quiet beauty that came not from perfect features, but from eyes that had seen hardship and chosen kindness anyway. Alice had come to the Wellington household 2 years ago, initially hired as a housekeeper. She was a single mother from Detroit, working multiple jobs to support her own 7-year-old daughter, Maya, who lived with Alice's mother while Alice sent home every penny she could spare. The Wellington job had been a godsend, excellent pay, live-in accommodation, and the chance to work for people who, despite their wealth, treated their staff with genuine respect. But somewhere between folding tiny clothes and preparing Timothy's favorite chocolate chip pancakes, Alice had discovered something unexpected. She had fallen in love with this family. Not romantically, that would come later, in ways none of them could imagine. She had fallen in love with the pure, unguarded joy of Timothy's laughter, the way Elena had included her in family conversations, the rare moments when Marcus's business facade cracked to reveal a father who would move heaven and earth for his son. When Elena got sick, Alice had quietly become more than just help. She became Timothy's constant companion during his mother's treatments, the steady presence who made sure homework got done, scraped knees got bandaged, and bedtime stories never stopped, even when Elena was too weak to tell them herself. Now, 6 months after Elena's funeral, Alice was watching Timothy fade away just like his mother had. The vibrant, soccer-obsessed boy who used to race through the mansion's halls had become a shadow of himself. The leukemia was aggressive, stealing his energy, his appetite, his childhood one day at a time. But what broke Alice's heart most wasn't Timothy's physical deterioration. It was the way he had started looking at her, not as Alice the housekeeper, but as the woman who bandaged his wounds, sang him to sleep, and held him when the nightmares came. In his innocent, 8-year-old mind, she had become the mother figure he desperately needed. And Alice? She loved him as fiercely as if he had been born from her own body. Dr. Harrison Matthews had been the Wellington family physician for over a decade. He had delivered Timothy, treated Elena through her cancer journey, and now found himself in the impossible position of telling a billionaire that money couldn't buy miracles. I've consulted with specialists in London, Tokyo, Johns Hopkins, and Mayo Clinic, Dr. Matthews explained during what would become known as the consultation that changed everything. His voice carried the weight of a man who had delivered too much bad news in his 40-year career. The consensus is unanimous. Timothy's leukemia is extremely aggressive. Chemotherapy has slowed the progression, but his body isn't responding the way we hoped. Marcus sat in the doctor's office like a statue carved from grief and determination. There has to be something. Experimental treatments. Procedures they're doing in other countries. I don't care about FDA approval or insurance coverage or... Marcus. Dr. Matthews's voice was gentle but firm. I understand your desperation. I've seen it in countless parents' faces over the years, but we've explored every conventional option. What about unconventional ones? Dr. Matthews paused, choosing his words carefully. There is one possibility, a bone marrow transplant. If we could find a compatible donor, it could potentially save Timothy's life. But he hesitated. Finding a match is incredibly difficult. Family members are the most likely candidates, but since you're not, what about extended family? Elena's relatives in Spain? My brother in California? We've tested everyone who was willing. No matches. Dr. Matthews leaned forward, his expression compassionate but realistic. Marcus, the odds of finding a compatible donor outside the family are extremely low. And even if we found one, there's no guarantee Timothy's body would accept the transplant. His immune system is severely compromised. Marcus stared at the floor, feeling the weight of his own powerlessness crushing down on him. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington couldn't write a check, couldn't make a phone call, couldn't leverage a relationship to solve his problem. That evening, as Alice prepared Timothy's dinner, a simple bowl of soup that she knew he probably wouldn't finish, she found herself thinking about her own daughter, Maya. They talked every night on the phone, brief conversations that stretched Alice's heart across the miles between New York and Detroit. Maya was healthy, vibrant, full of questions about when Mommy was coming home. "Soon, baby," Alice would always say. "Mommy's working hard so we can be together soon." But watching Timothy grow weaker every day, Alice had begun to question that timeline. How could she leave this little boy who had come to depend on her? How could she abandon Timothy when he needed her most? Yet how could she continue to stay away from her own daughter? The moral complexity of her situation wasn't lost on her. She was being paid to care for Timothy, yes, but what she felt for him transcended any employment contract. He had become, in every way that mattered, her second son. As September faded into October, the mansion that had once been filled with Elena's laughter and Timothy's energy became a place where hope went to die. Marcus threw himself into work with manic intensity, as if closing enough deals could somehow stop time. Alice moved through her days with quiet efficiency, maintaining routines that provided stability in an increasingly unstable world. And Timothy? Timothy began to retreat into a world of his own making, where dying wasn't scary because Mommy was waiting for him in a place where nothing hurt anymore. The three of them were dancing around the same unspoken truth. They had become a family forged by tragedy, bound together by love and loss in equal measure. Marcus, the billionaire who could buy anything except more time. Alice, the maid who had given her heart to a child who wasn't biologically hers. And Timothy, the little boy who had taught them both that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased, only earned through sacrifice. But none of them knew that in just a few weeks, their carefully constructed world would be shattered by 5 simple words that would test every assumption they had about family, sacrifice, and the true meaning of love. What they didn't know was that love, real love, doesn't calculate odds or consider consequences. Love simply acts. And sometimes, when the stakes are highest and hope seems lost, love finds a way to do the impossible. Stories like these remind us that the most profound moments in our lives often happen in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the sacred pauses where ordinary people discover they're capable of extraordinary things. If you've ever witnessed love that transcends boundaries, if you've ever seen someone sacrifice everything for another person, then you understand the power of what's about to unfold. Because what happened next would prove that sometimes the help we need comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the price of miracles is higher than anyone dares to imagine. October brought with it a desperate energy that consumed the Wellington household like wildfire. Marcus had transformed into a man possessed, turning his business acumen into a weapon against death itself. His private jet crisscrossed the globe as he sought consultations with every specialist, every researcher, every doctor who had ever published a paper on pediatric leukemia. The penthouse office that once housed billion-dollar deals now resembled a war room. Charts covered the walls, not profit projections or market analyses, but Timothy's blood work, treatment timelines, and a world map dotted with red pins marking every medical facility Marcus had contacted. His assistant, Margaret, had stopped trying to maintain his regular schedule. Every call was about Timothy. Every meeting was about finding a cure. In Geneva, Dr. Klaus Hoffmann, renowned for his groundbreaking work in pediatric oncology, delivered the same devastating conclusion Marcus had heard a dozen times before. "Mr. Wellington, I understand your desperation. If money could cure your son, he would already be well. But the human body doesn't negotiate like a business contract. Timothy needs a bone marrow match, and without family compatibility, we're searching for a needle in a haystack the size of the entire human population." In Tokyo, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had pioneered experimental treatments that pushed the boundaries of medical science, offered a glimmer of hope wrapped in brutal honesty. There are trials, yes. Treatments that haven't been approved in the United States. But Mr. Wellington, these are desperate measures with survival rates that would break your heart. Your son has perhaps 2 months left. Would you rather he spend them as a test subject, or would you prefer he spend them as your little boy? While Marcus battled the medical establishment across 3 continents, Alice was fighting a quieter, more personal war. Timothy's condition had deteriorated rapidly since the initial diagnosis. The energetic child who used to help her bake cookies had become a fragile figure who exhausted himself walking from his bed to the window. But it wasn't his physical weakness that broke Alice's heart, it was the way he had begun to withdraw from the world. Timothy spent hours staring out his bedroom window, having conversations with his deceased mother that Alice could only partially overhear. He had stopped asking about tomorrow, stopped making plans, stopped believing in next week. The turning point came on a gray Thursday evening in mid-October. Alice had prepared Timothy's favorite meal, grilled cheese cut into dinosaur shapes and tomato soup, the same lunch his mother used to make when he was feeling sad. She carried the tray upstairs, knocked gently on his door, and found him sitting cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by photo albums. "What are you looking at, sweetheart?" Alice asked, setting the tray on his nightstand. Timothy held up a picture of Elena, radiant and laughing, holding a much younger version of himself at what looked like a beach vacation. "I'm trying to remember her voice," he said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes I forget what she sounded like when she laughed." Alice sat beside him, her heart breaking at the matter-of-fact way he spoke about forgetting his mother. "Tell me about this picture." "We went to the Hamptons last summer. She taught me how to build sandcastles that wouldn't fall down. She said the secret was to make sure the foundation was strong, and then you could build as high as you wanted." Timothy traced his finger over his mother's face in the photograph. "I think I'm forgetting more things about her every day." "Oh, honey, no. The important things, the love things, those don't fade. They live right here." Alice placed her hand over his heart. Timothy looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for an 8-year-old face. "Alice? Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told Daddy?" "Always, baby. You can tell me anything." "I'm scared," he whispered. "Not about dying. Mommy explained that part to me in my dreams. I'm scared that when I go to be with her, you and Daddy will be all alone. I'm scared you'll be sad forever." Alice pulled him into her arms, feeling her world shift on its axis. This child, this beautiful, selfless child, was worried about leaving them behind. Even facing death, Timothy's biggest concern was for the people who loved him. "Timothy Wellington," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you listen to me. Your job isn't to me. Your job isn't to take care of us. Your job is to be 8 years old and let us take care of you." "But Alice, what if?" "No what ifs. Let's focus on right now. Right now, I made you dinosaur grilled cheese and it's getting cold." Timothy managed a small smile and picked up half of a sandwich. But after just 2 bites, he set it down and looked at Alice with an expression that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. "Alice." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I know you're not really my mommy. I know mommy is in heaven. But you take care of me like she did. And you love me like she did. And when I have bad dreams, you make them go away like she used to." Alice nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. "So, can I call you Mommy? Just sometimes? When it's just us?" "Oh, sweetheart." Alice's voice cracked completely. "Mommy." Timothy's voice was so small, so hopeful, so heartbreakingly innocent. "Can I live? Can I please just live?" What Alice didn't know was that Marcus had returned home early from his latest medical consultation. He had climbed the stairs to Timothy's room, intending to share what little hope Dr. Tanaka had offered, when he heard voices coming from behind the partially open door. Marcus Wellington, the man who had negotiated with world leaders and never shown weakness in a boardroom, stood frozen in the hallway as he watched his son call another woman Mommy and beg for his life. The sight of Alice holding Timothy, both of them crying, while his son pleaded for a future that medical science said was impossible, brought the powerful billionaire to his knees. He sank against the hallway wall, his hand over his mouth to muffle his own sobs, as he realized something that would change everything. Alice Washington wasn't just caring for his son out of professional obligation. She loved Timothy with the fierce, protective, unconditional love of a mother. And Timothy, in his innocent wisdom, had recognized that love and claimed it as his own. That night, after Timothy had finally fallen asleep in Alice's arms, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on the stack of medical reports waiting on his desk. Instead, he stood at his office window, looking out at a city that sparkled with lights and possibilities, and confronted a truth that his wealth had always allowed him to avoid. Some problems couldn't be solved with money, connections, or determination. His son was dying. Alice Washington, a woman who earned in a year what Marcus spent on a single business lunch, was providing Timothy with something that all of Marcus's billions couldn't buy: the daily, moment-by-moment presence of unconditional love. At 11:47 p.m., Marcus's phone rang. Dr. Matthews's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, I know it's late, but I've been thinking about our conversation today. About Timothy's case. About the bone marrow transplant option. Did you find something? A donor registry I haven't contacted? A new database?" "Not exactly. I've been reviewing Timothy's case with fresh eyes, and I want to discuss something with you. The racial compatibility issue we've been assuming might not be as absolute as we initially thought. There have been cases, rare ones, where cross-racial bone marrow transplants have been successful." Marcus sat up straighter. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we might want to expand our donor search beyond family members and people of Timothy's ethnic background. It's still a long shot, Marcus. A very long shot. But stranger things have happened in medicine." "Test everyone," Marcus said immediately. "Everyone in the household, everyone on my staff, everyone." Marcus, slow down. "We can't just test random people. There are protocols, procedures. And even if we found a match, the donor would have to undergo a serious medical procedure. Bone marrow extraction is painful, requires hospitalization, and carries risks. I'll pay whatever it costs. I'll cover all medical expenses, lost wages, everything. That's not the point. The point is that someone would have to voluntarily undergo a potentially dangerous procedure to save your son's life. That's not something you can purchase, Marcus. That's something someone has to give freely." The next morning, Alice woke before dawn, as she had every day for the past 2 years. She moved through her morning routine: shower, coffee, checking on Timothy, preparing breakfast, but her mind was elsewhere. Timothy's plea from the night before echoed in her thoughts. "Mommy, can I live?" As she folded laundry in the mansion's utility room, Alice found herself thinking about her own daughter, Maya. What would she do if Maya were dying? What lengths would she go to? What sacrifices would she make? The answer came to her with startling clarity: everything. She would give everything, sacrifice everything, risk everything to save her child's life. And Timothy had become her child in every way that mattered. Alice looked up to find Marcus standing in the doorway of the utility room. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled and worn. "Alice, could we talk? Privately?" "Of course, Mr. Wellington. Is everything all right? Is Timothy?" "Timothy's fine. As fine as he can be. This is about something else." They walked to Marcus's study, a room Alice rarely entered except to clean. Marcus gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, but instead of sitting behind his desk, he took the chair next to her. "Dr. Matthews called last night. He wants to expand the donor search for Timothy's bone marrow transplant. He's suggesting we test everyone. Staff members, people close to Timothy." Alice's heart began to race, but she kept her expression calm. "That makes sense. Alice, I need you to understand something. Bone marrow donation isn't like giving blood. It's a serious medical procedure. There are risks involved, pain, recovery time. I can't ask anyone to—" "Yes," Alice said quietly. "I'm sorry. I want to be tested." Marcus stared at her. "Alice, you don't understand what you're—" "Mr. Wellington, with respect, I understand perfectly." Alice's voice was steady, determined. "Timothy calls me mommy when he's scared. He holds my hand when he can't sleep. He trusts me to keep him safe. If there's even the smallest chance that I could save his life, then yes. Test me. The odds of you being compatible are extremely low, Dr. Matthews said. I don't care about the odds. The procedure is painful. You could be hospitalized for days. There are risks. I don't care about the risks. Alice. Mr. Wellington. Alice leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. 2 years ago, you gave me a job when I desperately needed one. You allowed me into your home, into your family. You trusted me with the most precious thing in your world. Timothy isn't just a job to me. He's my son too. Maybe not biologically, but in every way that matters. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he watched this remarkable woman volunteer to risk her life for his child. If I can save him, Alice continued, if there's any chance at all that I can give him the life he's begging for, then there's no question. Test me. And if I'm compatible, then we do whatever it takes. Marcus Wellington had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Employees who wanted promotions, business partners who wanted deals, politicians who wanted donations, socialites who wanted access. But sitting across from Alice Washington, he was face to face with someone who wanted to give everything she had, including her life, for his son. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next 3 days passed in a blur of medical appointments and tests. Dr. Matthews had been skeptical but thorough, running every compatibility test in existence. Alice submitted to blood draws, genetic testing, and comprehensive medical examinations while maintaining her regular duties with Timothy. She didn't tell Timothy about the testing. She didn't want to give him false hope if she wasn't compatible. Instead, she focused on making each day as normal and joy-filled as possible, reading him stories, helping with the schoolwork his private tutor assigned, and listening to his increasingly frequent conversations about his mother. On Saturday morning, as Alice was preparing Timothy's breakfast, her phone rang. Dr. Matthews's name appeared on the screen. Alice, are you sitting down? Should I? But what I'm about to tell you, I'm not sure I believe it myself. Alice's heart hammered against her ribs. What is it? You're compatible. Not just compatible, you're a nearly perfect match. The odds of this happening, especially across racial lines, are so astronomical that my lab ran the tests 4 separate times to be certain. Alice sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. Are you saying I can save him? I'm saying there's a very real chance that you can give Timothy his life back. But Alice, we need to discuss what this means for you. The extraction procedure is serious. You'll be under general anesthesia for several hours. There will be pain afterward, probably significant pain. You'll need weeks to recover fully. And there are risks, infection, bleeding, adverse reactions to anesthesia. When can we do it? Alice, did you hear what I just said about the risks? Dr. Matthews, did you hear what you just said about saving Timothy's life? There's something else, Dr. Matthews continued. The media will probably get wind of this story. A billionaire's son saved by his maid's bone marrow. It's the kind of human interest story that captures public attention. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Alice looked through the kitchen doorway toward the stairs that led to Timothy's room. At that moment, she heard his voice calling for her, asking if his pancakes were ready yet. Dr. Matthews, I don't care if the entire world is watching. All I care about is giving that little boy upstairs a chance to grow up, to go to college, to fall in love, to have children of his own. If my bone marrow can do that, then take as much as you need. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity, remind you that miracles aren't just stories we tell ourselves to feel better about the world. Sometimes, miracles are real, flesh and blood people who choose love over fear, sacrifice over safety, hope over despair. Because Alice Washington was about to prove that the most powerful force in the universe isn't money or medicine or technology. It's a mother's love, and that love doesn't require biology, only choice. But first, There would be conversations that would change everything. Conversations between a billionaire and the woman who was willing to die for his son. Conversations between Alice and Timothy about hope and healing and the power of believing in tomorrow. And conversations between doctors who had never seen anything like what was about to unfold. The breaking point had arrived. And from the breaking would come either tragedy beyond imagination, or a miracle that would redefine everything they thought they knew about family, sacrifice, and love. The news of Alice's compatibility spread through Mount Sinai Hospital like wildfire. Dr. Matthews had seen medical miracles before, but the statistical impossibility of what had just occurred left even the most seasoned medical professionals shaking their heads in wonder. A young black woman from Detroit proving to be a near-perfect bone marrow match for the son of a white billionaire wasn't just unlikely, it was the kind of medical phenomenon that defied every probability chart in existence. Within 24 hours, the hospital's most elite medical team had assembled. Dr. Sarah Chin, the nation's leading pediatric hematologist, flew in from Stanford. Dr. Michael Okafor, a transplant specialist whose success rates bordered on legendary, canceled his vacation to join the team. Dr. Isabella Rodriguez, one of the world's foremost experts in cross-racial organ compatibility, arrived from Barcelona with research data that would prove crucial to Timothy's survival. But while the medical world prepared for what some were already calling the miracle transplant of the decade, 3 people sat in a hospital conference room confronting the very human reality of what lay ahead. Marcus had aged years in the past week. The man who once commanded boardrooms with unwavering confidence now sat hunched forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across from him, Alice maintained her characteristic calm, though anyone looking closely would have noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she held Timothy's medical files. Timothy himself sat between them, looking smaller than his 8 years in the oversized hospital chair. He had been told that Alice might be able to help him get better, but the complexity of bone marrow transplantation was beyond his young comprehension. What he did understand was that Alice was willing to go to the hospital and do something that might hurt her, all to help him live. Alice, Timothy had asked the night before, his voice small in the darkness of his bedroom, "Will it hurt you? The thing you're going to do to help me?" Alice had chosen her words carefully. "It might hurt a little, sweetheart, but you know what? Sometimes the things that hurt the most are also the things that help the most. Like when you get a shot to keep you from getting sick, or when the doctor has to put medicine in your arm that stings but makes you stronger. Will you be okay? I'm going to be just fine, baby. And you're going to be better than fine. You're going to be healthy and strong and ready to build sandcastles that reach all the way to the clouds." Dr. Chen had insisted on multiple consultations with both patients before scheduling the procedures. The medical team needed to ensure that everyone fully understood the risks, the timeline, and the long road to recovery that lay ahead. "Mr. Wellington, Alice, I want to be completely transparent about what we're facing," Dr. Chen began during their final pre-surgery meeting. "This transplant has an excellent chance of success, but both procedures carry significant risks." She turned to Timothy first, her voice gentle but honest. "Timothy, your body has been very sick for a long time. The medicine we're going to give you will help clean out the sick cells, but it will also make you feel worse before you feel better. You'll be in the hospital for several weeks, maybe longer. There will be days when you feel too tired to do anything but sleep." Timothy nodded solemnly, his 8-year-old mind processing information that would challenge adults. "And Alice," Dr. Chin continued, "the bone marrow extraction is a serious surgical procedure. You'll be under general anesthesia for approximately 3 hours. We'll use specialized needles to extract marrow from your pelvic bone. Recovery typically takes 2 to 4 weeks, and there will be significant pain initially." "What about the risks?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. Dr. Chen exchanged glances with her colleagues. "For Timothy, the primary risks are infection and rejection. His immune system will be completely suppressed to prevent rejection of the new marrow, leaving him vulnerable to any virus or bacteria. For Alice, The risks include bleeding, infection, adverse reaction to anesthesia, and in very rare cases, nerve damage. The room fell silent as the weight of those words settled over them. However, Dr. Okafor added, Alice's compatibility with Timothy is so remarkable that the rejection risk is minimal, and her overall health makes her an ideal donor candidate. Alice reached over and took Timothy's hand. When do we start? The next 72 hours transformed the Wellington mansion into something resembling mission control. Marcus had hired private nurses to provide round-the-clock care for both Alice and Timothy after their procedures. The mansion's entire east wing was converted into a medical facility, complete with specialized equipment, medication storage, and direct communication lines to Mount Sinai. Alice spent her final days before surgery in a whirlwind of preparation. She video called her daughter Maya every few hours, explaining that Mommy was going to help the sick little boy get better, but she might not be able to talk as much for a few weeks. "Are you scared, Mommy?" 7-year-old Maya asked during one of their calls. Alice looked at her daughter's face on the phone screen, this beautiful child who looked so much like her, and felt her heart break a little. A little scared, baby. But you know what makes me brave? What? Knowing that I'm doing something really, really important. Something that might save someone's life. And knowing that you're proud of me for being brave enough to help. Maya's face brightened. "I am proud, Mommy. Grandma says you're a hero." "Grandma's pretty smart," Alice said, tears threatening to spill over. "I love you, Maya. More than all the stars in the sky. Love you too, Mommy. More than all the ice cream in the world." Meanwhile, Timothy was undergoing his own preparation. The conditioning regimen to prepare his body for the transplant was perhaps the most difficult part of his entire treatment. Chemotherapy drugs powerful enough to destroy his existing bone marrow left him nauseated, exhausted, and more vulnerable than ever. But something remarkable happened during those difficult days. Timothy began to fight. For the first time since his diagnosis, he wasn't just enduring his treatment, he was actively participating in his own recovery. He asked questions about the procedure, wanted to understand how Alice's bone marrow would help him, and even started talking about things he wanted to do when he got better. "Alice," he said one evening as she sat beside his hospital bed, "when I'm all better, can we go to the beach? Like Mommy and I used to do." "We can go anywhere you want, sweetheart." "And can Maya come too? I want to meet her. I want to show her how to build sandcastles that won't fall down." Alice's breath caught. Timothy had never mentioned Maya before, but somehow he had understood that Alice had a daughter, and he wanted to include her in his dreams of the future. Maya would love that, Timothy. She would love that so much. October 28th arrived gray and cold, with the kind of autumn rain that seemed to mirror the anxiety felt by everyone involved. Alice woke at 5 a.m., showered, and dressed in the comfortable clothes the hospital had recommended for easy removal. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who was about to either save a child's life or die trying. She was at peace with both possibilities. Timothy was already at the hospital, having been admitted the night before for final preparations. When Alice arrived at 6 a.m., she found Marcus sitting beside Timothy's bed, reading him a story. Father and son looked up when she entered, and Timothy's face lit up with a smile that made everything Alice was about to endure worthwhile. "Alice, you came." "Of course I came, baby. We're going to do this together, remember?" Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway with her surgical team. "Are we ready?" What followed was a carefully choreographed medical ballet that had been rehearsed dozens of times. Timothy would undergo his transplant in or 3, while Alice's bone marrow extraction would take place simultaneously in or 5. The extracted marrow would be processed and transported immediately to Timothy's operating room, where Dr. Chen would begin the delicate process of introducing Alice's life-giving cells into Timothy's bloodstream. At 8:15 a.m., Alice was wheeled into or 5. The last thing she saw before the anesthesia took effect was Timothy being wheeled past her doorway toward his own operating room. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Alice saw something in Timothy's gaze that she had never seen before: absolute trust that everything was going to be all right. The bone marrow extraction took 3.5 hours. Dr. Smith and his team used specialized needles to extract marrow from multiple sites on Alice's pelvic bone, a process that required precision, patience, and continuous monitoring. Every few minutes, extracted marrow was rushed to the processing lab, where technicians prepared it for immediate transplant into Timothy's bloodstream. Meanwhile, in or 3, Timothy lay unconscious as Dr. Chen performed what could only be described as a medical resurrection. The little boy's existing bone marrow had been completely destroyed by chemotherapy. Alice's marrow was his only hope for regeneration, his only path back to life. At 11:43 a.m., the first of Alice's bone marrow cells entered Timothy's bloodstream through a central line. Dr. Chen and her team watched the monitors intently, looking for any signs of immediate rejection or adverse reaction. There were none. For the next 2 hours, Alice's life-giving marrow flowed into Timothy's body while she remained unconscious in the recovery room next door. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Timothy's vital signs remained stable. The transplant was being accepted without complication. And then at 1:47 p.m., everything changed. Alice's blood pressure began to drop. Slowly at first, then precipitously. Her heart rate became irregular. The anesthesia that should have been wearing off seemed to be deepening instead of lightening. Dr. Smith was at her bedside within seconds, barking orders to the nursing staff. "Get me an EKG. Check her blood gases. I want a full metabolic panel now." But Alice's condition continued to deteriorate. Her breathing became shallow and labored. Her blood pressure dropped to dangerously low levels. Most alarming of all, she showed no response to stimulation that should have awakened her from anesthesia. "What's happening?" Marcus demanded when Dr. Smith emerged from Alice's room with an expression that every parent dreads seeing on a doctor's face. "We're not entirely sure yet. Alice is experiencing complications from the anesthesia. Her body isn't responding the way we expected." "What kind of complications?" Dr. Smith chose his words carefully. "Marcus, Alice has slipped into a coma. We're running every test we can to determine the cause, but right now, we're focused on stabilizing her condition and supporting her vital functions." Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. She? We don't know. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I wish I could give you more definitive answers, but we're in uncharted territory here." The irony was devastating. Timothy's procedure had been a complete success. Alice's bone marrow was already beginning to regenerate his immune system, and early indicators suggested that his body was accepting the transplant beautifully. In a few weeks, barring complications, Timothy Wellington would be a healthy 8-year-old boy with a full life ahead of him. But Alice Washington, the woman who had given him that future, lay unconscious in the room next door, her own life hanging in the balance. That night, as Alice lay motionless in the ICU surrounded by machines that breathed for her and monitored every heartbeat, Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed and finally understood the true cost of miracles. Timothy was going to live. The woman who had saved him might not. And somewhere in the back of Marcus's mind, a terrible thought began to take root. What if Alice's sacrifice had been too great? What if saving Timothy's life had cost Alice her own? How would he explain to his son that his recovery had come at the price of the woman he called Mommy? But the most terrifying question of all was one that Marcus couldn't bring himself to voice, even in his own thoughts. What if the world believed he had somehow caused this? What if people thought that Marcus Wellington, the billionaire who had already lost his wife under suspicious circumstances, had somehow orchestrated Alice's coma? Because rumors were already beginning to spread. Whispers in hospital corridors. Questions from reporters who had gotten wind of the story. Speculation about the billionaire whose wife had died of cancer just 6 months ago, and whose maid had now fallen into a mysterious coma after saving his son's life. The leap of faith had been taken. Alice had given everything she had to save Timothy's life. Now the question remained, would she survive her own sacrifice? And in the darkness of that question lay the seeds of something even more dangerous than death, doubt. Because when miracles come with such a terrible price, people begin to wonder if they're miracles at all, or something much more sinister. The leap of faith was complete, but the landing would prove far more treacherous than anyone had imagined. The first whisper came from a night shift nurse whose sister worked for a gossip blog. By morning, it had become a murmur among hospital staff. By noon, it was trending on social media. By evening, it had exploded into a full-blown media sensation that would forever change how the world saw Marcus Wellington. Billionaire's Maid falls into mysterious coma after saving his son's life. The Wellington curse. Wife dies, maid fighting for life. Did Marcus Wellington poison his son's savior? Sound of phones buzzing, social media notifications, news broadcasts overlapping. The story had everything that modern media craved: wealth, mystery, racial dynamics, medical miracles, and the tantalizing suggestion of foul play. Within 48 hours of Alice's surgery, news vans lined the street outside Mount Sinai Hospital. Reporters with perfectly coiffed hair and predatory smiles delivered breathless updates about the mysterious coma that has shocked the medical world and raised disturbing questions about one of America's most powerful families. Dr. Matthews found himself in the impossible position of trying to protect patient confidentiality while addressing increasingly wild speculation. Ms. Washington is receiving the finest medical care available, he repeated to the press corps camped outside his office. Her condition is serious but stable. The family has requested privacy during this difficult time. But privacy was a luxury that Marcus Wellington could no longer afford. Dr. Matthews, is it true that Alice Washington was in perfect health before the surgery? Dr. Matthews, what are the odds of a healthy 28-year-old woman falling into a coma from routine anesthesia? Dr. Matthews, given that Marcus Wellington's wife died just 6 months ago, are authorities investigating possible foul play? The questions came like machine gun fire, each one more loaded than the last. And with each, no comment from the hospital staff, the rumor mill spun faster and more viciously. The most damaging story came from investigative reporter Jennifer Martinez, whose expose in the New York Tribune read like a thriller novel. Marcus Wellington has always been known as a man who gets what he wants, when he wants it. When his wife Elena was diagnosed with cancer, he spared no expense seeking treatment. When she died anyway, he appeared to grieve appropriately. When his son was diagnosed with leukemia, he again mobilized vast resources to find a cure. But what happens when a billionaire's resources aren't enough? What happens when the solution to his problem lies in the hands of someone he can never truly control? Alice Washington agreed to risk her life to save Timothy Wellington's. The surgery was successful. Timothy is recovering beautifully. Alice Washington lies unconscious, and doctors can't explain why. This reporter has spoken to 3 independent medical experts who agree. Healthy young adults don't typically fall into extended comas following routine anesthesia. So the question becomes, what aren't we being told about Alice Washington's condition? And why won't Marcus Wellington allow independent doctors to examine her? One source close to the investigation suggests that the answer may lie in understanding just how much Marcus Wellington stands to gain from Alice Washington's silence permanently. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo disguised as journalism. It implied everything while proving nothing, raised questions that couldn't be answered due to medical confidentiality, and painted Marcus as a villain without ever directly accusing him of a crime. The public response was immediate and brutal. #JusticeForAlice began trending worldwide. Protesters gathered outside the Wellington mansion with signs reading "Black Lives Matter" and "Alice died for your son." Death threats arrived by the hundreds. Marcus's business partners began distancing themselves. Board members called emergency meetings to discuss his fitness to lead the company. But nowhere was the impact of the media frenzy felt more acutely than in Timothy's hospital room. The 8-year-old boy, who had been making remarkable progress in his recovery, suddenly found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't comprehend. "Daddy, why are there so many people outside with cameras?" Timothy asked one afternoon, his voice weak but clear. The bone marrow transplant had been successful, and his body was producing healthy blood cells for the first time in months, but he was still fragile, still recovering. Marcus sat beside his son's bed, looking older than his 42 years. The past 2 weeks had carved deep lines around his eyes and gray into his hair. "They're reporters, Timothy. They're interested in your story, in how Alice helped you get better." "But why do they look angry?" Marcus struggled to find words that would make sense to an 8-year-old. How do you explain to a child that the world thinks his father might be a murderer? How do you tell your son that the woman he loves like a mother is fighting for her life, and that people think you're the reason why? "Some people don't understand what happened, son. They're confused, and when people are confused, sometimes they get angry." Timothy was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the startling clarity that seriously ill children often develop. "Daddy, Alice is going to wake up, isn't she?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Marcus looked at his son, this beautiful boy who had been given a second chance at life by a woman who might not get one herself, and felt something break inside his chest. "I hope so, Timothy. I hope so more than anything in the world." Week 3 of Alice's coma brought a development that sent shockwaves through both the medical community and the court of public opinion. Dr. Rodriguez, the Spanish specialist who had flown in for the original consultation, published a preliminary paper about the case that inadvertently fueled the conspiracy theories. Asterisk, the patient presents with what appears to be a paradoxical reaction to propofol, the anesthetic used during her bone marrow extraction. However, toxicology reports show levels of propofol consistent with standard surgical anesthesia. More puzzling is the presence of trace amounts of an unknown compound in her bloodstream, a compound that appears to be interfering with normal neurological function. Asterisk. Asterisk, while this compound could be a previously unidentified metabolite created by the interaction of anesthesia with the patient's unique physiology, the medical team is also exploring the possibility that it was introduced post-surgically. Further investigation is ongoing. The phrase, "introduced post" is ongoing. The phrase, "introduced post-surgically," was all the media needed. Within hours, every news outlet in America was running headlines about mystery compounds and possible poisoning. Legal experts appeared on television discussing the likelihood of criminal charges. Former prosecutors analyzed the case as if Marcus had already been indicted. The most damaging interview came from Dr. Patricia Williams, a toxicologist who had never examined Alice but was happy to speculate on national television. Asterisk, what we're looking at here is a healthy young woman who underwent a routine procedure and then mysteriously fell into a coma from which she cannot be awakened. The presence of an unknown compound in her bloodstream is deeply concerning. In my 30 years of forensic toxicology, I can tell you that unknown compounds don't just appear in patients' blood. They're introduced. The question is, by whom and why? Marcus found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. Every attempt to defend himself only seemed to make him look more guilty. When he hired additional security for the hospital to protect Alice from reporters trying to sneak into her room, headlines screamed, "Wellington blocks access to victim." When he brought in additional medical consultants to help with Alice's case, critics accused him of tampering with evidence. Most devastating of all, Marcus couldn't visit Alice without triggering a media circus. Every time he entered Mount Sinai Hospital, photographers captured images of him that were then analyzed for signs of guilt or innocence. His grief was interpreted as guilt. His determination to help Alice recover was seen as a cover-up. His refusal to speak to the media was taken as an admission of wrongdoing. But Marcus wasn't the only one suffering under the weight of public suspicion. Alice's mother, Dorothy Washington, had flown in from Detroit when she learned of her daughter's condition. the 63-year-old woman, who had raised Alice as a single mother and was now raising Alice's daughter Maya, found herself thrust into a media spotlight that felt more like an interrogation lamp. "Mrs. Washington, did your daughter ever express concerns about working for Marcus Wellington?" "Mrs. Washington, was Alice afraid of her employer?" "Mrs. Washington, do you believe Marcus Wellington is responsible for your daughter's condition?" Dorothy Washington, a woman of quiet dignity who had worked 2 jobs for most of her adult life to provide for her family, faced the cameras with a composure that shamed the reporters questioning her. "My daughter Alice is the kindest, most selfless person I've ever known," she said during the one press conference she agreed to give. "When she called to tell me about Timothy's condition, she cried for that little boy like he was her own child. When she told me she was going to help him, I was scared, but I was also proud. My Alice has always put other people's needs before her own." "But Mrs. Washington, don't you think it's suspicious that she's in a coma now?" Dorothy's eyes flashed with a fire that reminded everyone where Alice had inherited her strength. "What I think is suspicious is that y'all are more interested in pointing fingers than in praying for my daughter to wake up. That little boy is alive because of Alice. Instead of looking for someone to blame, maybe you should be thanking God for the miracle that's already happened." Week 4 brought an unexpected ally, Timothy himself. Despite being weak from his recovery, the 8-year-old had been listening to the nurses' conversations, catching fragments of news reports, and piecing together the terrible truth that people thought his father had hurt Alice. On a Wednesday afternoon, with his recovery progressing ahead of schedule, Timothy asked his father a question that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. "Daddy, did you hurt Alice?" Marcus felt his world stop. His own son, the child Alice had risked everything to save, was looking at him with doubt in his eyes. "Timothy, no, son, I would never hurt Alice. I love Alice. She saved your life." "Then why are people saying you did?" "Because sometimes, when something bad happens, people need someone to blame. And when you have a lot of money like we do, people sometimes think that makes you a bad person automatically." Timothy considered this with the solemnity of someone far older than his years. "Alice isn't a bad person." "No, son. Alice is the best person I've ever known." "Then I want to see her." "Timothy, you're still recovering. The doctors don't think." "Daddy." Timothy's voice carried a strength that surprised them both. "Alice saved my life. If people think you hurt her, then I need to tell them they're wrong. And I need to tell Alice that I'm okay. I need her to know that her gift worked." The decision to allow Timothy to visit Alice was controversial from a medical standpoint, but Dr. Chen ultimately agreed that the emotional benefit might outweigh the risks. On a cold November morning, exactly 5 weeks after Alice's surgery, Timothy Wellington was wheeled into Alice's ICU room for the first time. What he saw there broke his young heart and galvanized his resolve. Alice lay motionless, connected to machines that breathed for her and monitored every biological function. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and she had lost significant weight. But to Timothy's eyes, she was still the woman who had held him when he cried, who had made his favorite foods even when he couldn't eat them, who had called him sweetheart and baby and loved him like a mother. Timothy reached out with a trembling hand and touched Alice's fingers. "Alice? It's me, Timothy. I'm getting better. The doctors say your bone marrow is working. My blood is getting stronger every day." Alice, of course, didn't respond. But Timothy continued talking to her as if she could hear every word. "Alice, I know you can't hear me, but I wanted to tell you something. People are saying mean things about Daddy. They think he hurt you. But Alice, I know Daddy would never hurt you, because Daddy loves you just like I do. And I wanted to tell you that when you wake up, not if, when you wake up, we're going to go to the beach, remember? You and me and Maya. We're going to build sandcastles that reach all the way to the clouds." The image of 8-year-old Timothy Wellington, still weak from his own life-saving surgery, holding the hand of the unconscious woman who had saved his life while defending his father against accusations of attempted murder, was captured by a hospital security camera. Somehow, That footage found its way to the media. The video of Timothy's bedside vigil changed everything. Here was the child at the center of the story, clearly recovered thanks to Alice's sacrifice, defending his father with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Here was living proof that Alice's gift had worked, that her sacrifice had not been in vain, that whatever was causing her coma, it wasn't preventing the miracle she had made possible. Public opinion began to shift. The hashtag Timothy and Alice began trending alongside hashtag Justice for Alice. Support groups formed, not just for Alice's recovery, but for the little boy who had become the unwitting center of a media storm. But even as public sentiment started to turn, Alice remained unconscious. Week 5 became week 6. The mysterious compound in her bloodstream continued to confound medical experts. Her brain activity showed signs of awareness, but she remained unresponsive to all external stimuli. And Marcus? Marcus Wellington, one of the most powerful men in America, found himself completely powerless to help the woman who had saved his son's life. He couldn't cure her, couldn't defend himself without seeming guilty, couldn't even visit her without triggering another media circus. All he could do was wait and pray and wonder if the price of his son's miracle was going to be the destruction of everything else he held dear. Because 6 weeks was becoming a lifetime, and Alice Washington was still fighting a battle that no one could fight for her. The darkness had settled over all of them like a suffocating blanket. Timothy was recovering, but Alice was fading. The public was beginning to believe in Marcus's innocence, but Alice still wasn't waking up. The medical mystery remained unsolved, the future uncertain, and the price of miracles was proving to be higher than anyone had imagined. If this story has moved you as much as it's moved millions of others around the world, you understand that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in hospital rooms where love and loss hang in the balance. Share your thoughts about family, sacrifice, and the power of believing in miracles, because the next chapter of this remarkable story will test everything you think you know about the strength of the human spirit. It happened at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in early December, exactly 6 weeks and 3 days after Alice Washington had closed her eyes following Timothy's surgery. The ICU was quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines that had been keeping Alice alive, when suddenly one of those rhythms changed. Her heart rate monitor, which had maintained the same steady pattern for over a month, began to fluctuate. Not dramatically, not dangerously, but enough to catch the attention of the night nurse who had been checking on Alice every 15 minutes for the past 6 weeks. Sarah Chen, the night nurse who had become Alice's most devoted caretaker, approached the bed with the cautious optimism of someone who had seen too many false alarms. But what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Alice's eyelids were fluttering. "Alice? Alice, can you hear me?" Sarah whispered, not wanting to startle her patient, but unable to contain her excitement. "Alice, if you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." The response was barely perceptible, the faintest pressure against Sarah's palm, but it was unmistakably intentional. Alice Washington was fighting her way back to consciousness. Within minutes, the ICU was buzzing with controlled chaos. Dr. Matthews appeared first, followed quickly by Dr. Chen and the rest of the medical team that had been monitoring Alice's case around the clock. They ran tests, checked responses, monitored brain activity, all while Alice's consciousness gradually returned to her body. By 5 a.m., Alice's eyes were open. By 6 a.m., she was responding to simple commands. By 7 a.m., she spoke her first words in 6 weeks. Where is Timothy?" Dr. Matthews, a man who had delivered both devastating news and miraculous recoveries throughout his career, felt tears streaming down his face as he answered, "Timothy is fine, Alice. He's healthy and strong, and he's been waiting for you to wake up." The call to Marcus came at 7:23 a.m. He had been awake anyway, as he had been every morning for the past 6 weeks, sitting in his study with coffee growing cold as he stared out at a city that had branded him a villain. When his phone rang and Dr. Matthews's name appeared on the screen, Marcus's heart nearly stopped. "Marcus, you need to get to the hospital immediately. Alice is awake." The drive to Mount Sinai took 12 minutes, but it felt like 12 hours. Marcus's mind raced with questions. How was Alice? Would she remember what had happened? Did she know about the accusations against him? Would she even want to see him after everything the world had said about him? But when he burst through the doors of Alice's ICU room, none of those questions mattered. Alice was sitting up in bed, weak but alert, and her face lit up with the most beautiful smile Marcus had ever seen. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice hoarse from weeks of intubation but strong with emotion. "How is Timothy? Please tell me he's okay." Marcus felt something break inside his chest, not from pain this time, but from overwhelming relief and gratitude. Even after everything she had endured, after lying unconscious for 6 weeks while the world speculated about her condition, Alice's first concern was still for his son. "He's perfect, Alice. He's healthy and strong and asking about you every single day. The transplant worked. You saved his life." Alice closed her eyes and smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God. Thank God." The medical explanation for Alice's recovery came later that morning, delivered by Dr. Rodriguez with the enthusiasm of a researcher who had just solved an impossible puzzle. The unknown compound we found in Alice's bloodstream wasn't introduced externally, she announced to a room full of doctors, nurses, and Marcus. It was created by Alice's own body in response to the combination of anesthesia and the bone marrow extraction procedure. Essentially, Alice experienced an extremely rare autoimmune response that caused her brain to produce a protein that interfered with normal consciousness. Dr. Matthews leaned forward. "Are you saying her body poisoned itself?" "In a manner of speaking, it's a phenomenon we've seen perhaps 3 times in the entire literature of modern medicine. The protein built up in her system over the weeks, which is why she couldn't wake up. But once her body finished processing the trauma of the surgery and began producing different antibodies, the protein was neutralized. It's actually a sign of an incredibly strong immune system, not a weakness." Marcus felt the weight of 6 weeks' worth of accusations and suspicion lifting from his shoulders like chains falling away. So there was never any external poison? No foul play? None whatsoever. Alice's coma was caused by her own body's extraordinary response to saving Timothy's life. In a very real sense, she sacrificed so much of herself to save him that her body needed time to rebuild what she had given away. The press conference that afternoon was unlike any Marcus Wellington had ever given. Instead of announcing a new business deal or responding to market conditions, he stood before the cameras that had stalked him for 6 weeks and told the world that Alice Washington was awake, was recovering, and that medical science had completely exonerated him of any wrongdoing. But Marcus did something else that surprised everyone, including himself. He apologized. "I want to apologize to Alice Washington and her family for the circus that has surrounded her recovery. While I had nothing to do with her medical condition, I did have everything to do with being the kind of person that people were willing to believe could harm someone as good as Alice. That's on me, and that's something I intend to change." He paused, looking directly into the cameras with an honesty that he had never shown in public before. "For most of my adult life, I've measured success in terms of money, power, and influence. I built walls around myself and my family because I thought that's what strength looked like. But Alice Washington taught me something I never learned in any boardroom. Real strength isn't about protecting yourself from the world. It's about making yourself vulnerable enough to love people who can't do anything for you except love you back." The media response to Marcus's press conference was immediate and transformative. The man who had been painted as a heartless billionaire villain was suddenly being seen as a father who had been humbled by love and loss. #TMarcus began trending alongside #AliceStrong. The protesters outside the Wellington mansion packed up their signs and went home. But the most important response came from an 8-year-old boy who was watching the press conference from his hospital bed. "Daddy told the truth. Timothy announced to his nurse with absolute satisfaction. "I knew he would never hurt Alice. Now everyone else knows too." Alice's recovery was swift once she regained consciousness. Her body had been sustained by excellent medical care during her coma, and within days she was sitting up, eating solid food, and asking when she could see Timothy. The reunion, when it finally came, was captured by every news outlet in America, but for once, the media coverage felt celebratory rather than intrusive. Timothy, now strong enough to walk short distances, practically ran into Alice's hospital room. When he saw her sitting up, alert and smiling, he burst into tears of joy and threw himself into her arms. "Alice, you're awake. You're really awake. I'm here, baby. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I told everyone you would wake up. I told them you were too strong to stay asleep forever. And Alice, your bone marrow worked. I'm all better. Look." Timothy stepped back and did a little jump to demonstrate his renewed energy, and Alice laughed, the first real laugh she'd had in months. "I can see that, sweetheart. You look wonderful." "Alice, can I tell you something?" "Anything, baby. While you were sleeping, I talked to you every day. I told you about getting stronger, and about how Daddy was sad, and about how I wanted you to meet Maya when you woke up. Did you hear me?" Alice looked into Timothy's eyes, this remarkable child who had faced death and emerged with a wisdom that amazed everyone around him. "I heard every word, Timothy. Every single word." The weeks that followed Alice's awakening were a period of healing that went far beyond the physical. Alice returned to the Wellington mansion, not as an employee, but as a member of the family. Marcus had insisted on paying all her medical expenses, covering her lost wages, and providing a substantial compensation package, but money wasn't what Alice needed most. What she needed was to see Timothy continue his recovery, to watch him return to being a normal 8-year-old boy who complained about homework and got excited about ice cream. What she needed was to bring her daughter Maya to New York for the promised beach trip, where Timothy could teach her to build sandcastles that wouldn't fall down. And what she discovered she needed, though she hadn't expected it, was to be part of a family that had been forged not by biology, but by sacrifice, love, and the kind of bonds that death itself couldn't break. The conversation that changed everything happened on a snowy February evening, 3 months after Alice had awakened from her coma. Timothy was completely healthy now, back in school, playing soccer, and living the normal childhood that Alice's sacrifice had made possible. Maya had moved to New York and was attending the same private school as Timothy, and the two children had become inseparable. Marcus found Alice in the kitchen, preparing dinner just as she had 2 years ago when she first started working for the Wellington family. But everything was different now. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. She was the woman who had saved his son's life, the woman who had shown him what real love looked like, the woman who had become the heart of their reconstructed family. "Alice, can we talk?" She looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, struck as always by how much Marcus had changed over the past year. The hard edges had softened. The perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased. He smiled more, laughed more, and spent more time with Timothy than any business deal could justify. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Marcus took a deep breath, suddenly feeling as nervous as he had during his first billion-dollar negotiation. "Alice, I've been thinking about us. About this family we've become. About Timothy and Maya and how happy they are together. About how you've changed my life in ways I never imagined possible." Alice set down her knife and turned to face him fully, sensing that whatever Marcus was about to say would be important. "Marcus, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Alice, you saved Timothy's life, but you also saved mine. Not medically, but in every way that matters. You showed me how to love without conditions, how to put family before business, how to be the kind of man that Timothy can be proud to call his father." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Alice's breath catch. "Alice Washington, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You loved my son when he needed a mother. You sacrificed your life to save his. You forgave me when the world thought I had tried to kill you. You turned our house into a home and our broken family into something beautiful and whole. He opened the box to reveal a stunning but simple diamond ring that caught the kitchen light and threw rainbows across the walls. Alice, will you marry me? Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved? Will you let Timothy and me be your family, officially and forever? Alice stared at the ring, at Marcus, at this man who had been transformed by loss and love into someone she had never expected to see. The billionaire who had once measured everything in dollars had just offered her something that couldn't be bought. A love that had been earned through the deepest trials imaginable. Marcus, she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Alice, I know this might seem sudden, but I've thought about it for months. I love you. Not because you saved Timothy, though I will be grateful for that every day of my life. I love you because you are kind and strong and selfless. I love you because you make Timothy laugh. I love you because when I look at you, I see the woman I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Alice felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this man who had once seemed so distant and untouchable, who was now kneeling in their kitchen offering her his heart. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Marcus, yes. The engagement was announced quietly, with no press conferences or media fanfare. Marcus and Alice wanted their love story to belong to them, not to the world that had watched their every move for so many months. Timothy's reaction was pure joy. Does this mean Alice will really be my mommy forever? If that's what you want, sweetheart. That's what I've wanted since the first day she held me when I was scared. Maya, now living permanently with her mother and her new family, had her own question. Does this mean Timothy will be my brother? If you want him to be. I do. He already taught me how to build the best sandcastles in the world. The wedding was small and private, held in the garden of the Wellington mansion on a perfect spring day 6 months later. Timothy served as ring bearer, Maya was the flower girl, and Dorothy Washington walked her daughter down the aisle with tears of joy streaming down her face. As Alice and Marcus exchanged vows, they weren't just promising to love each other, they were celebrating the miracle of second chances, the power of sacrificial love, and the truth that families aren't always born. Sometimes they're forged in the fires of shared trials and emerge stronger than anything biology could create. In the end, Marcus Wellington learned that the most valuable acquisition of his life couldn't be purchased, negotiated, or leveraged. It could only be received as a gift from a woman who loved a little boy enough to risk everything for him. Alice Washington learned that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't dying for someone, it's living for them, building a life with them, choosing them every single day. And Timothy Wellington learned that miracles aren't just medical procedures or business deals or front-page headlines. Miracles are what happen when ordinary people choose to love extraordinarily, when they sacrifice for each other, when they refuse to let fear or doubt or even death itself break the bonds that matter most. Today, 5 years later, the Wellington family lives quietly in their Fifth Avenue mansion that is now filled with the laughter of 2 healthy children, the love of parents who found each other through tragedy, and the daily miracles that happen when people choose love over fear. Marcus still runs his business empire, but he leaves the office at 5 p.m. sharp to have dinner with his family. Alice has started a foundation that helps match bone marrow donors with children in need, turning her own experience into hope for others. Timothy is 13 now, an honors student and soccer player who volunteers at the hospital where Alice saved his life. Maya is 12, an artist like her mother, who paints pictures of families that have been brought together by love rather than birth. And sometimes, when they walk along the beach where Elena first taught Timothy to build sandcastles, they remember the woman whose love started it all, and they give thanks for the chain of miracles that brought them together. Because in the end, this isn't really a story about wealth or medicine or media scandals. This is a story about the truth that love, real, sacrificial, unconditional love, is the most powerful force in the universe. It can heal diseases, overcome impossible odds, survive death itself, and transform strangers into family. This is a story about how sometimes, when we give everything we have for someone else, we discover that we haven't lost anything at all. We've just learned what it means to truly live. If you've been touched by Timothy, Marcus, and Alice's journey, if you understand that the greatest love stories aren't about romance but about the families we choose and the sacrifices we make for each other, then you know that miracles aren't just something we read about. They're something we can choose to create, one act of love at a time. Share your own stories of unexpected family, of love that transcends boundaries, of moments when someone's sacrifice changed your life forever. Because in a world that often feels divided, stories like these remind us that love really can conquer all.